topic we decided today, an important topic for anyone who has separated, is that reconciliation phase where you have it in the back of your head, like, could I make this work if I just tried a little bit harder? Maybe I should go back and try something else, do something else, push myself harder, find another strategy. Therapy is the obvious choice for most people. Let's go to counseling, let's try and save it. Even if you were in counseling prior to separating, I know for me personally, we were in counseling, separated, had that time apart, 6 months apart, and then both sort of were like, oh, are we really doing this? Should we try one more time? And that part where we tried one more time, that reconciliation part, was probably the hardest, most painful time of the whole thing for me. And we touched on that last time when we finished off our podcast, and you were saying something similar. So what do you want to share about your experience of trying to make it work? Did you have a period of being apart and then get back together, or was it just a period of trying to make it work when you both kind of knew it was on its last breath?
Yeah, a little bit of everything. Prior to officially getting divorced, we were still living together the entire time. Timelines are vague now because it's been a few years, but probably in therapy for 1.5 years, 2 years. Yeah. We started with a therapist that started off great, and over time, I didn't feel like we were getting from him what I was hoping we would get, and it eventually became one-sided. And I felt the pain that most men feel when they go to therapy, which is that all the change is on them and all of the blame is on them, and they're the reason that things are the way they are. And in my intuition, I knew that wasn't the case. And I knew that I wasn't the only one that had to change, and that to make this work truly, and not just for her happiness, but for the marriage to work and for ultimately for me to be happy, that person wasn't going to be the best fit. And so we ended up firing him, hiring a person that has changed my life and that I still meet with a few times a month today. And she started out as a marriage counselor, or somebody to help us. Yeah. And I think ultimately she did help us. She ultimately helped both of us become better versions of ourselves, and in no way promoted us getting divorced, but did everything that she knew how and that she could get through to us to help make it work. And ultimately it just didn't. And so, yeah, there comes a point where you're like, we tried everything. We tried multiple therapists. We tried, I'm a little bit apprehensive to admit, but we tried dating other people. We tried having a bit of a open marriage. Ultimately, those were things that were probably just delaying the inevitable. So it didn't stop until it stopped. Yeah.
Yeah, and that takes us back to that reconciliation time where you are just trying every last thing you can throw at it to not get divorced. So when you're saying open marriage, you're really at that point where you will try anything pretty much. And that's what I, talk about a lot, because, people will put that one blanket failure label on it, or that you've walked away easily, or you haven't stuck it out. And I'll always push for saying you can never understand what goes on behind the closed doors of a marriage, of a partnership, of who's trying what, and the desperation most people feel before they get to that point where they are separating. And that's the nitty-gritty part of it we're talking about today, is that time where you basically know, you kind of know there's the voice saying, I don't know if this is going to be able to stick together, but I cannot fail at this, so I will put everything into it. And it becomes almost destructive, and you look back on it with the benefit of hindsight, knowing that actually it should have been called a lot earlier, but we try and we try and we try. So I think it's important for anyone who's going through it to sort of understand that if you're really knowing it and it's just so painful, and you want to admit it to yourself. That's why I say often it's that first admitting, I don't even want to keep trying anymore because I think it's really, really done. And I think it's also done from his side. For me, I was like, if it was two people going hard trying to fix it, the chances are you might actually get somewhere. So I'm not saying that two people aren't trying to fix it in their own way, but I think that's where the breakdown happens anyway. In the first place, you're on two different sort of trajectories of what a quality relationship looks like. Yeah. What do you
A couple of things come to mind. So from an outsider's perspective, right? Your family, your friends, probably not the people that you talk to every day about your divorce.
Yeah.
They may look at you, and some of them may be married themselves, and they may look at you and say, well, why couldn't you just work harder? And I knew that by the time I said, okay, that's it, we're done, things have to change. We can't keep going down this path. I knew that I could sleep easy that night because I know I gave it all. There was nothing else I had left to give. And there was nothing more I wanted more than to make that marriage work. Since I was a 5-year-old boy, there was nothing I wanted more. And so I knew in my conscious, in every ounce of my being, I made the right decision, and it's time to move on, and it's time to start healing. And so we did that. The other thing, I think you made a great point, that by holding on, what you may be doing, what I was doing, was stunting my growth. That we were two people, and for 12 years, we grew in the same direction. Over time, we grew apart. And I was going in my direction, she was going in her direction. And ultimately, they were just too opposite for us to stay in a marriage and be happy. We could stay in a marriage and be there for the kids, do all that, but we'd be arguing every day. And that's not the life I'm going to live. So, great couple of points for sure.
It's owning that there is the pivotal part. It's like, you've got to be able to own that. I could stay here, grind it out, miserable along with him. He'll be miserable. And I sincerely doubt our kids will be loving on that environment. So it usually will come down to that argument. Usually it's like, stay together for the kids. That argument is becoming very old as we see the children growing up through that. Do you have any friends? It's interesting because I actually have adult friends that have said quite often, considering, I really wish mum and dad had just split up because growing up was awful in that particular environment, that cold environment. Have you not had someone say that?
I haven't heard that, but I absolutely subscribe to the idea that staying together for the kids is probably the worst thing for the kids. It's not going to do anybody any good to walk around with this dirty energy and just, you go to a family party or a friend's party or, whatever the event might be. You might be able to fake it for a little bit, but people know. And that's when you start to do other things behind people's backs. And it's certainly not the life that I'm interested in living. I live a life of honesty, both with myself and with the people that I love. And I got to say, I'm as honest as I come, like on a show like this. Like we've done the 6 episodes now, and every word that's come out of my mouth has been my truth. So you can't live an honest life if you're not living an honest life. If you're in a marriage that you shouldn't be in, if you're going through infidelity, if whatever the issue is that you're going through, you got to be honest with yourself first. So.
And also, you can, looking back on reconciliation as well, I call it that reconciliation. Ultimately, of course, we didn't reconcile, but the idea was, let's try to work it, even though we both know it's pretty gone, but let's try one more time. And it's that honest part where, you look back and go, I could have done a lot of things better. I absolutely could have, but the benefit of hindsight. And that is the purpose of this, of course, us talking to the people out there that might be going through it now. It's like, I do think too that I wouldn't take that part away, even though it was so painful, even though it was so messy. And actually, I felt like it was kind of like we got to this kind of sweet spot and then we just went damage, 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 leave. And I always look back and go, oh, it'd be really nice if we hadn't had that little damage part there where we kind of caused the most damage because we're in the most pain. But in saying that, I would always say, I'm glad we did it because it was like, all right, I have done everything I could have done. And now I can walk away and feel, pretty seated in my soul that this was the right thing for me, for my kids, and for my ex, and now I maintain, yes, absolutely, because I see that we do have a happy, thriving family. And that is the other thing I was saying about, the friends who have said, I wish mum and dad had separated. Like now that my kids are older, your kids are at that age, not far off where we did actually separate 10 years ago. But I see their own peers that are struggling and having issues, as teens, and their parents are together. And so it doesn't dictate that. So I would take that out of the mix, when people are really, really stressing and thinking they'll stay together for the kids. And yet I dare say we would get pushback on that from many, because that's the biggest pushback you get. You stay together for the kids, you work at it. I just feel like
the pushback is fine, right? So everybody is entitled to their own opinion, and we're just two people telling our opinions and our stories, and that doesn't make them right or wrong or us right or wrong. It's just our truth. And also divorce is like anything else. It's an experience that you go through, and the idea is that everything's a learning experience, and nothing was time wasted. That you went through what you went through for a reason. You don't understand what the reason is today or during that moment, but over time, one of the reasons maybe for us is that we're able to have this show to help other people that are going through or have recently gone through that same experience.
Yeah.
So everything happens for a reason, including divorce.
Yeah. It takes a while to get to that point, doesn't it? When you can look
back
and say that. And actually you're still quite fresh to it. So to have that perspective is really, I think, pretty impressive to have that perspective. I mean, I always did think this is happening for a reason, because I have that trust anyway, that things happen for a reason. Everything you did in your reconciliation, is there anything you would change?
Wow. Look at you in the ninth inning coming through with a grand slam question. Is there anything I would have changed? I don't think there's anything I could have changed to save the marriage. I do think there are lines that I crossed emotionally that if I could do it again, I would not, because we were very close to having, police involvement and people getting physically hurt, emotionally damaging the kids and ourselves in the long term. I think we got up to that line a few times, but thankfully we never crossed it. If I could do it all over again, I wouldn't have even approached those lines. I would have had the boundaries in place that I have today. And if I could do it all over again, I don't like to live with regrets, and I don't regret anything that we did. But if I could do it all over again, for the kids' sake, I would have not pushed that boundary as much as I did. The things that I would have in place to prevent that, we've talked about on previous episodes. Communication, clear, concise communication, not over the phone, through text messages, emails, some sort of record, have a schedule, manage each other's expectations, manage each other's, this is what I'm okay with, this is what I'm not okay with, respect the other person's boundaries. Those are all sort of the things that come to mind as we're thinking about what would I do different. Those are the big things that come to mind. I don't think there's any one big thing that would have saved our marriage, though.
My thing that I would have done differently looking back is just being more honest earlier on about how I was feeling, because I tried to hide it and hide it and hide it and hide it for so long. And I know that he did too. We were not as open and honest as we could have been about the state of things.
Mm.
And I think that if I could have just been a bit more honest, I mean, I was people pleasing. I was too scared to say, this is how I feel and I have these needs and it's okay for me to feel this way. I would be honest earlier on about how I was feeling, because I feel like burying things down probably made me more resentful and then act in ways, like I said, I'll be honest and say that I was drinking a lot back then. So I was going out and I was, partying up to get some relief. I was actually in a band, and so I was just every weekend I'd go and I'd have gigs and I would drink, and that was my way of dealing with it. I was just not home. And I used to try to sort of bring it up, but I couldn't find the right words, and I just kept shutting it down and blaming. And yeah, it was very, very freeze sort of. It's a hard one when I look back, but I when I do look back, I think I really wish I could have just been more honest and gone, blah, this is what I'm feeling. This is help, because I actually need, but I just had this feeling like even if I asked for help, I wouldn't get the help that I needed. So that's the only thing I'd do differently. I don't think anything would change with the outcome. I just think it would probably be a little more of a smoother, respectful departure out of the marriage. But, realistically, what marriage is going to end without a bit of a, tumultuous time at the end? And that's kind of how they end. And so you're left with that feeling of, you've got all the good times from the past and then it ends like that. And so you kind of get stuck in that bad ending. And it's like, it's a really nice thing to be able to move through with this mindset we have, the mindful divorce, to look back and take the lessons and understand, for me, two humans are just being human, and it's okay. Whatever we each did to each other, today we care for each other, and we can still look back and look at those things. And I'm sure if I was to talk to him about it, he would say he'd do things differently too. But those are the lessons that we take away. But I'm glad we tried. I'm glad we did the reconciliation. What about yourself? You glad you did all that?
Yeah, again, ultimately, for me, it came down to I just remember the morning where I just woke up and I flipped the switch and I said, I mean, for me, it's as easy as flipping a light switch. And I know that sounds overly easy for people watching this. And for me, it's symbolic of, I felt this way, and now I'm not going to feel that way anymore. And anytime I start to feel this thing come on, no, my switch is off. I'm rejecting it. I don't accept it. And so for me, it was simple as, I spent the last year and a half doing everything that I knew what to do. I went to multiple therapists. We had, I don't know how many dates, and especially with kids at that age, there were, I guess 3 or 4 and 6 and 7, like, it's harder to date. So there's a lot of, as you know, I mean, that's probably around the same age as your kids were.
Yeah.
And so you have to go out of your way to make a date night. It can't just be like, all right, it's Friday night, we're going out. Whatever the case may be, time apart. I spent days just finding myself hiking in the woods or sitting at water or sitting at the ocean, or we went on family trips still. And like, we always felt like, well, let's try something else. Let's try this. Let's try this other therapist. Let's try this other beach. Let's try whatever it is. And so I knew at the end of the day, the straw that broke the camel's back. I don't want to get into her personal business today, but I woke up that Sunday morning and I just said, that's it. And I told her, and 10 minutes later, with her permission, I said, we're going to talk to the kids today. And I think it was less than 24 hours later, she was moved out, and that was it. And that led to a whole nother transition of like emotions, and you're in an empty house for the first time and ever. I never lived by myself. Even I went from my mother to living with her and other girlfriends. So that was a whole nother transition. But I mean, there's a lot there to unpack. But I know that the second that I sit down and talk to my kids, that's it. There's no coming back from that, because I was in that seat. And oh my God, can you imagine if like the confusion in the kid's mind, if you told them that and then a week or a month or a year later and said, no, we're getting back together. Like, you can't kill that hope. It's dead. And so I had to know in my mind that the second that I tell them it's the second that I can't go back on my word, no matter how things change.
Okay, so you and I are different there, see, because we said to the kids, you know, we're separating, and we got a place, and we actually moved. So the kids stayed in this house, and we had an apartment, and we would just live in that apartment 3 days, then come back to the house and be the parent, then go to the apartment, because we were like, we need some time apart where we're not like selling houses, and we needed just that breather. Like, is this what we want to do? So for 6 months, that's what we did. And then I tried, this is the reconciliation part, you know, so I tried to move back in. We said, okay, let's try a different therapist, and we'll try all these other things. Moved back in, and it's funny because you're like switch flicking, you know. I wouldn't say it was like that for me, but it was definitely a day I just woke up and there was just this, I think it's just the line in the sand. There's just a knowing. You cannot explain that to anybody until they've been through it themselves. I mean, I get what you mean about the light switch, because there's just this knowing. I just went, I need to go. I need to go, and this time go. So then I did get a place of my own, and then we started the proper separation and divorce. So yeah, my kids probably did have some there. But for me, I weighed it up. I was like, it's worth it, because if we can make it work, well then, hey, great, happy days for everyone. But so I gave it the last ditch attempt, and yeah, so we're different in that way. But it's interesting, the two scenarios.
That line in the sand, though, is that feeling when you woke up and that monkey was off your back, or, you know, the clarity that you had.
Clarity.
For me, the peace that I felt.
Yeah, it's a relief.
It's such a relief, because it's like you're in a 12-round boxing match, and it's just the 12th round over and over and over and over, and it seems like the fight is never going to end until you stop fighting. And so I'm reminded of episode 1 or 2, and the metaphor of you running in the woods, being chased by these demons, chased by these monsters, and those monsters were really scary until you fell, you turned around, you looked at them, and they suddenly weren't so scary anymore. The divorce monster in this case wasn't so scary anymore. Like, I fought him, and we fought together, and we fought the good fight, and we fought probably longer than we wanted to, or we should have.
Yeah.
And that's why I know when I stopped fighting, like, you win. Universe, whoever it is that you believe in, this thing, I get it. I see it now. I accept it. I'm at peace with it. And we all tried. It's just not going to work. And that's okay.
And now you can start the marathon of the healing process. And it got really, really painful, but at least now you can start to move through, because up until then you're going nowhere. You were just stuck in pain, stuck.
Yep.
Yeah.